Welcome back to the Sublimation Life. Today we're going to look at how we make a perfect, vibrant tumbler with perfect rims, beautiful seams, and beautiful colors. I'll go ahead and show you the exact process from start to finish on how to make a tumbler from this to this. The first thing I'm going to show you are the products that I use. Of course, we have a sublimated ready tumbler that you're going to use to sublimate your image onto. The tape that we use is a Cricut heat resistant tape. I'll go ahead and link all this in the description box for you down below. You're going to need some painter's tape, optional but highly recommended. A burnishing tool. This one is just from the dollar store. It's very convenient though and works perfectly. I have a cutting blade for cutting purposes when I'm cutting along lines. You'll also go ahead and need a ruler. If you don't want to use a ruler and cutting blade, you can also just use a regular pair of scissors. This tool here, it's an optional tool, but it works amazingly. It's called a Pinch Perfect. There is a link in the descriptions with a discount code if you want to try it out. Optional, but also helps. Also, you're going to need some sort of software to be able to print your images. I specifically use Inkscape, and I'll show you exactly how I go about using that. And then I'll show you the exact steps, step by step, on how to go from this tumbler to this tumbler. Let's get started. Here we are in the Inkscape app. This is my preferred method of printing my designs. For me, it just works the best. But there are other options, just depends on what you prefer to use. Now, if you are using Inkscape, you might have this version or you might have a different version. If you're following with this version, just follow along the exact same way. If you're following along with the version that has a large white canvas with a rectangular black bordered outline, it's going to be the exact same process. Your buttons just might be in a different section, but it's the exact same process, and I'll try to explain that along the way. The most important thing to remember either version you're using is that this box, whether it has an outline or not, is your template of what you're going to be printing on. So your image must be in this box. If it's out of the box, it won't print correctly. It has to be in the box. Now, the first thing we want to do is adjust our paper size because, like I said, this is the template for your paper, and this is not an 8.5 by 11, which is what I typically print on. For a different version, you're going to go to your upper left, hit the file, and it'll go down to Document Properties and click that. For this version, you're going to go up to this little wrench with the paper. And either way, you're going to have the same options right here. The first thing I like to do is change my measurements to inches because that's what I measure in. Formats, I go to the US letter 8.5 by 11. And I'll go ahead and change my orientation to landscape, and it'll print out the correct way. You can do the portrait if you like, but you have to flip your image just to make sure it's in the box. Now that's typically all you need to do in this section, so we'll close out of that window, and you'll see this has changed a little bit. I'll go ahead and zoom in slightly so we can see. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and bring our design into Inkscape. Same thing if you're doing the other version, it's the file, open, and then bring your image in. This version here, we just go to this little folder, click that, and it automatically brings up what I'm using because that's the last thing I worked with. There's options for 20 ounce and 30 ounce, tapered and straight. We are just using the straight 20 ounce version today. I'm going to go ahead and open that. This box will come up whatever version you're using. You'll just press OK. And now your image should be right here for you. So now you should have your design in the Inkscape canvas. Now we just want to resize our design to fit what we're going to print on. For this version and also the other versions, this is going to be the same exact thing. We're going to use our upper toolbar here. For this version and the other versions, this part's going to be the exact same when we're changing size. You're just going to use your upper bar here. Right here is the width, right here is the height, and this little lock is to lock the ratio in. For me, I'm not going to do that because I have a specific size that I use. As you can see, it's preset to 9.3 by an 8.2, but I actually like to use 9.33 by 8. Now, be aware, all tumbler sizes are completely different. You need to measure your own tumbler to get the exact measurement that's going to work for you. Now you can see my image for this version. It kind of reset my paper size back. So I'm just going to go back and reset it. And now your image should fit perfectly back into that template. Now, like I said, this part is very important when you're using Inkscape, because if your image is not in this box or that black outline, it will not print correctly. If it looks like this, half your image is going to get cut off about right there. So make sure it's in the center of the box to get an accurate print. From here, in this version, you'll go up to your little printer icon, click print. If you're in the other versions, you'll go up to File, go down, press Print, and check your presets. Once we have our image printed, we'll go ahead and wrap our tumbler. All right, so now that we have our design printed out, we can go ahead and start preparing it to wrap around our tumbler. When I do go to wrap my tumbler, I do like to cut off a part of the border, but I keep the other part on. This ensures that everything lines up properly around that tumbler. All right, as you can see, I cut off the right side and the top of the borders. This is because I like to have an extra flap, this white part, to be able to pull tightly when I'm wrapping my tumbler. And I'll explain the bottom part here just shortly. Now, before we move on, I do want to show you the importance of printer settings. As you can see, this was a before print. I will try to zoom that in for you and let it focus. You can see how light it is. There's some lines, roller lines, pizza wheels as you would call them. And this is before the print settings were adjusted. To this is the print settings adjusted. And I do have a tutorial on the exact settings I use to get your settings and prints to be nice and clear and crisp. Now let's go ahead and bring our tumbler on over, and then there is also an additional tool that I like to use now and then when my hands are sore, if I can't get the paper pulled tight enough, or even if you have arthritis in your hands. It's just a really great tool to have. A really quick trick I like to do before I get the tumbler wrap around the tumbler, I like to go and make sure my image is the right length. And there's a really super easy trick. You go ahead and take your image facing outwards and take your tumbler, place your image on top of your tumbler. And normally you're gonna have your blank part on the upper side, but right now I'm just gonna fold it over and under like that and pull the other image over. I'm just gonna pop that down, make sure it's all lined up. And this, if you pull it and wrap it, you just make sure your image is long enough and it's lined up properly. That ensures that you're not gonna get that white line down the middle where the seam should be. It just makes sure you have a proper length. Now let's go ahead and get the wrap wrapped around the tumbler. I am gonna show you this tool really quick. It's called the Pinch Perfect. It's super handy and it helps pull the image really tight if you can't get it tight enough. In the descriptions, there's a link on where to get it along with a discount code. Let's go ahead and show you how to use this really quick. I have a secondary image just to show you how to use it. With these ones, you will cut the side borders off and the top border, but you can leave the lower border on. You'll go ahead and take your tumbler, turn it upside down, take your image, and it'll also be upside down with the lower border up. You'll go ahead and wrap your image, and like so. Give it a little tap there, and you can see there's a little tiny gap there, and it's kind of hard to pull it tight. You'll take your Pinch Perfect tool. There's little grips right there, if you can see that. Those are grips that pull the paper tight. You just go ahead and take that, wrap it right around the tumbler, and those grips will be along the seam. And just like this, you go ahead and grab the knobs and it pulls your paper tight. And that way you can tape your image and the seam will be closed for you. So that's the benefit of having the Pinch Perfect. Again, if you can't pull it tight enough, or arthritis, it's just giving you trouble, it closes up the seam really, really well and really nice for you, just like that. Now let's go ahead and show you the way to do it without the Pinch Perfect. This is generally the way I do it most of the time, unless I'm having a hard time or if I'm tired that day. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and wipe your tumbler off and get all the fingerprints off, oil, grease, anything that might be on there. That way it's not impeding on the ink staining onto the tumbler. All right, so you have your image laying flat like this, borders are set. We'll go ahead and take our tumbler. The inner part is on the top side where you cut off the border. We'll go ahead and lay it in the middle. We'll take our design here. And now this time, the side with no border is gonna fold in and should be against the tumbler. The side with the border, you're gonna pull on over, turn it onto its top, and just tap it to make sure that this is a very flat plane right there. Your paper should be lined up exactly with the top of the rim. Now I said I was going to explain why I leave the bottom on there, and this is why. If you can see in there, you can see that there's a little excess amount of my image sticking out, and this right here is actually where the fold is and where the seam will be. Right there, you can actually make sure that your seam is going to be lined up. If it's lined up like that, most of the time, probably 99% of the time, your design is going to line up perfectly as well. Now, if it's, say, like this, that's a little dramatic, but you can see it's not lined up. So you can go through and correct it and just make sure that that lower seam is completely flush. And that's going to ensure a proper lineup of your seam, especially with the seamless images. Now from here, I like to go ahead, and this is why I like to leave this extra piece, because from here, we need to make sure we pull it very super tight to ensure that the whole image is completely flat against the tumbler. So pull really, really well. We'll go back, make sure our seam is still lined up really properly there. And it looks pretty nice and flush. I'll go ahead and give it one more good pull, and then we'll put tape along the seam. I like to put one here, and one there. A little trick I like to do with this, I will go ahead and put it on the flap side, just a little piece of it. Hold that flap piece of tape and then pull really hard on the tape. And again, that just pulls everything really tight and makes sure everything is really nice and flat. All right, so we have those 3 pieces of tape right there. Just go back, make sure your seam, your lower part of the image is completely lined up, and it looks really good in there. Now we're gonna go ahead and put the heat resistant tape right along this as well. And then we'll also do a round layer right here, and then one along the bottom as well. Okay, so now when we're putting this on, go ahead and have it centered right over the seam. And we're gonna go ahead and just place on the flap again, but don't lay it all the way down. Because this part, we wanna kind of roll our finger over the tape to make sure everything goes on really smooth and keeps everything really tight. So it's kind of smoothing along with your finger, pretty good pressure. All right, so you should be kind of right here right now. You will have little extra ends. I just like to fold those over. Again, I'll explain why I do these extra ends a little bit later. And then from here, you can either use your finger or your hand to just smooth everything out, or use a burnishing tool just to really smooth everything out, make sure all the air pockets are out. Now that we're here at this point, so we've done our 3 little pieces and our seam line. This is a very important step. This is where people will talk about the fingernail trick. If you haven't heard of that, there is a primary seam right here, a secondary seam right here, and then one a little bit off to the side. The one off to the side is not as important as these very 2 right here. If you can see here, and I hope you can, right here, there's kind of a little lip where your finger will catch on. And that is where we're gonna run our fingernail right up along that seam to make it super defined. This is gonna ensure that there's no air in between the paper and the tumbler. If there is, you're gonna get that blowout spots. So you wanna do it on that one, and then this one right here as well. Okay, so you can see, if you can, that it's really defined right there and also right there. And again, that's just gonna make sure you don't get those blowout spots, or what is a lot of people call incorrectly ghosting. Ghosting is actually when there's an image on top of an image that's kind of faded. That's actually ghosting. These are more blowout spots because there's air pockets. So just make sure you get that really good. Go over it a couple of times if you need to, just to make sure those seams are really pushed in. Now this one, we're gonna go ahead and put our heat resistant tape right around the upper rim and then around the bottom. We'll go ahead and do that as tight as you can. So same thing, I like to hold it, put as close to the rim as possible. We'll hold it, and then you're gonna kind of pull at the same time as you're laying the heat resistant tape down. And the better you get at this, the quicker it's gonna go. Usually this takes me a couple of minutes at this point to do it. You get the technique down, and then you are gonna go super fast with it. Same thing, I leave a little tail right there. And then I'll go ahead and just smooth it out really well, just like this. Don't worry if there's a little overlayer, it's fine, don't fold it, just leave it the way it is. All right, now we'll do the bottom side. Now, remember you have an excess right here of paper. Do not fold that. A lot of people will fold it in. That actually creates more air pockets, and you'll get that kind of edgy bottom look where we want to get a nice, crisp, smooth look. So do not fold those in, but I'll show you what to do to make sure it looks really, really nice. So when we're putting the bottom part on, you can kind of see through the piece of paper here. You want, again, to just go right along that bottom line right here. You don't want to overlap too much. Again, just like you did the upper rim, just go right along there, hold it, and pull really tight. Okay, so now you have your lower one done. Go ahead and just smooth that out really, really well as well. Just like that. And go ahead and kind of just re-burnish those seam lines where we were talking about earlier with your nail. Just make sure everything still is really pressed in and nice. All right, so heat resistant tape layers are on. You don't have to do the painter's tape if you don't want to. However, I do, because there are times where the heat resistant tape actually starts to lift up and then your image is going to become loose. The painter's tape just reinforces everything and makes sure that the paper and the image stays in place, because if it moves, you'll kind of get a smeared, splotchy look, and we don't want that either. You're going to do the exact same thing. Don't worry about doing the 3 lines here, but do the seam and then the wrap around the rim and the bottom. All right, and then also go ahead and same thing, pretty much every time you put a new layer on, smooth it out really, really well. That way everything's really smooth and there's no air bubbles or air pockets. All right, so now we're down to the bottom here. And this is where I'm gonna show you how I wrap the bottom so we don't get those jaggedy edges. You're still gonna do the same thing with this heat resistant tape that you did. You didn't go all the way down, you just went to the rim. But this time you're just gonna go so much slightly right after where the heat resistant tape is, and I will show you why. It's gonna make it look really nice though. Okay, so now we have the bottom on. Now I said don't fold it, and you're still not gonna fold it. You're not gonna bend it in, but you're gonna take your hand and ever so slightly right after where you can kind of see it start to kind of crinkle. Do that and wrap your hand around that. Again, don't fold it, but let it crinkle just a little bit. And this is gonna kind of give it a little curve where it'll go onto the little bottom, and that way you don't have that white little lip sitting right there. All right, so kind of like that. It looks a little bit ripply. That's great, that's perfect. Just make sure it's not bent in. And this is what you should have, maybe a little bit cleaner. But this is what it should look like by the time you're done wrapping it. Again, you don't have to do the painter's tape, but for me personally, it is a big, huge help and a great step to do. So let's go ahead and throw this into the convection oven and see what it looks like once it's all finished up. All right, as you can see, we're here with the convection oven. It is a Farberware convection oven, French door. You can put in multiple at a time. The door opens like that. It works really super well. I do prefer this over a press. Presses can be really finicky at times with the pressure plates inside, whereas this, it's all around, the heat's evenly distributed, so it works really super well. You do want to know that you want an internal thermometer. Some of the ovens can run a little bit hotter or lower, so you want to make sure you're at the proper temperature. We're going to be at 350 degrees. As you can see, the thermometer does say 350 degrees, and that's what we want. Sublimation happens at 350 degrees, so if you're under 350, you're not going to get the best results. If you go over 350, you're more likely to burn the image versus make it nice and vibrant. If you're at 400 degrees, it's much too hot, and that is burning your image off of your tumbler or fading it, and it's going to look brown. If it looks green, then it's undercooked. When we put our tumbler in, we are going to put it in, and then we're going to rotate it a quarter turn every single minute for 5 minutes. So you'll take your tumbler, put it in with the seam upwards. 1 minute goes by, quarter turn, 1 minute, quarter turn, 1 minute, quarter turn, 1 minute, quarter turn. The last one should have your seam back on top again. So you're going to do the seam twice. So we'll go ahead and put it in 5 minutes exactly. I'll go ahead and start when it gets back to the minute. All right, so we're putting our tumbler in for the first time. As you're turning it, you do want to make sure you're using heat gloves. That way you're not touching the very hot tumbler. All right, so we're at our very first turn, and we're going to turn this a quarter turn, just like that. I'm not going to stop and show you this every single time, but I wanted to show you what I meant by the quarter turn. Also, another side note, make sure you're in a very ventilated area if you're doing it inside, windows open, a fan, or if you're outside, even better. All right, so we've been in there for 5 minutes, rotated a quarter turn, and we're going to go ahead and let this cool off, and then we'll head over to the table to get it revealed. All right, so our tumbler is all cooled off enough to handle. Usually I don't let it cool off, but to be able to show you today, I did let it cool off to where it's enough to be able to handle. If you can see, you can kind of see the design fading through the paper. Some papers are too thick to be able to see it, but if you can see your image through your paper, the sublimation process worked pretty well for you. So let's go ahead and peel this back and see what we get. And as I said, I was going to show you what the tabs were for. It's just easier to pull instead of trying to pick at it, especially when it's really hot. So it's just an easier way to get the tape off. All right, so now that we're done fighting with the tape, also another reason I like to peel it right when it comes out, because it's still gooey, the tape is, and it comes off super easily. So I'll just take off this last piece here, and we'll go ahead and see what the tumbler looks like. And you have a beautiful, gorgeous tumbler with very vibrant colors. Beautiful. Your rim up here is nice and perfect. You can see 0 seam. I don't even know where the seam is supposed to be actually, so I can't even really point it out to you. And then the bottom where people have the most problems, that's what you have right there. So to make a perfect sublimation tumbler, that's exactly how I do it, down from my print settings, which you can find in the other tutorial, how I print it, where I print it, how I wrap, and the baking process as well. So go ahead and test it out for yourself, see how you like it. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this tutorial, if it was helpful for you, go ahead and boop that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share for others so they can get helped as well. Have a wonderful day and happy crafting.